Good morning, guys. Today we are talking about Geoffrey Chaucer and the Canterbury Tales. Well, as for some information about his life, he was born in about 1343. Of course, we can't know exactly when he was born, probably in 1343, and he was the son of a wine merchant. He received an excellent education, and he was employed in the house of John of Gaunt, that was the son of King Edward III of England. He had a very clever mind, a great inventiveness, and very good practical skills that helped him in raising his social status. That is, his father was a merchant, but he came in touch with the aristocracy and even with the court and the kings. He worked as a controller of the customs. Customs in Italian is dogana, for the port of London. He took part, as I have told you, he worked for the court of the different kings, and for this reason he took part in important diplomatic missions. He died in 1400 and was the first poet to be buried in Westminster Abbey in the Poets' Corner. Westminster is the most important abbey in London, and there is a special area of this abbey, that is the Poets' Corner, where the most important writers, British writers, were buried. Well, he was the first to be buried there. Why is Chaucer considered the father of English literature? Well, first of all, because he was the first English poet to be known by name. Because before we know that there was an oral tradition that even when it was given a written form was anyway anonymous. So he is the first poet we have information about. The language was the dialect of his native London, and a little bit as Dante did in Italy with the Italian, he sort of invented the standard English, because he used it for the first time in his work, and it became the basis of modern English. His masterpiece is the Canterbury Tales, where he tried to give a portrait of the English society of his time. His work, his life and his works can be divided into three different periods. The first one is the French period, with poems modeled on the French Romance styles and subjects. In the Italian period, it was a period of greater maturity, and it was the period when he came in touch with the great medieval Italian writers such as Boccaccio. In fact, his work, The Canterbury Tales, was inspired to Boccaccio's Decameron. The English period is characterized by great realism, and it includes his masterpiece, The Canterbury Tales. This work can be considered a narrative poem, a little bit like the Iliad, the Odyssey, the Aeneid, and so it is a narration but in verse. It is a very long narration but in verse, and it contains a variety of narrative elements. That is the setting in time and place, that is the place and the time when action occurs are clearly explained. There is a very precise description of character and the use of a narrator. The narrator is also one of the characters of the work. He is one of the 30 pilgrims that go to Canterbury, to the shrine of Thomas Becket. and it gives insight into individual work, it gives insight, introspezione, into the individual characters, representing real lifestyles of the time, with the psychological depth, una profondità psicologica, and representing the moral views and experiences of the social classes that they represent, in particular the middle class and clergy, because among the 30 characters, the 30 pilgrims, there were no members of the aristocracy, because they didn't want to be mixed with other social classes, and no members of the poor classes, because they didn't have much money, they couldn't afford such a pilgrimage that obviously had a cost. As for the structure, the work can be divided into a general prologue, where the pilgrims are introduced. Talking about that, we have to say that the pilgrims are 30. There are 30 people, including, as I have told you, first, Chaucer himself is one of the 30 pilgrims. They meet at the Tabardine in London. They join a pilgrimage to Canterbury Cathedral. That was a holy place. It was the shrine, the place where the shrine of Thomas Becket was. Thomas Becket was the Archbishop of Canterbury that was murdered by Henry II for religious matters. Do you remember? The innkeeper, that is the host, l'oste, of the inn of the Tabardine, suggests that every pilgrim should tell 2 stories, 2 on the way to Canterbury and 2 on the way back. So 4 for each pilgrim. And as the pilgrims are 30, there should be 120 stories, even though we know that in fact there were just 24, because Geoffrey Chaucer died before the end of the work. And the various tales are both religious and humorous, moral and satirical, and sometimes even profane. They are on the same style as Decameron's tales, that are very often profane. The stories, the 24 tales, are usually preceded by a prologue, which introduces the theme of the tale, and sometimes is also followed by an epilogue. Be careful not to get confused with the general prologue, that is, in fact, a more general description of the pilgrims, and that can be considered sort of a frame of the 24 tales. What is the setting? Actually, there is the starting the place, the city from which the pilgrimage starts, that is London, the point of departure. That has an allegorical, a symbolical meaning, because London is the city and stands for human and linked, and is human and linked to worldly pleasures, ai piaceri temporali in qualche maniera. The destination was Canterbury, that on the contrary was a holy place. It was holy and a symbol of the celestial city. This pilgrimage has also an allegorical meaning, because in fact it corresponds, it describes the journey of men from the worldly life to the life after death. Why did the pilgrims decide to do this pilgrimage to Canterbury? Well, Canterbury Cathedral is the shrine of Thomas Becket, England's first martyr, that, as I have told you first, was linked to Henry II, that had him murdered because he had rebelled against the king, against the king decisions, and that defended the freedom of the church. And also because taking a pilgrimage was very common in Chaucer's day, even though, as I have told you, not all people could join such a pilgrimage because it was costly, and so the very poor couldn't afford it. And the people went on a pilgrimage to ask for healing, guarigione, from some disease, or to be forgiven, perdonati, for their sins, or also to simply to socialize, to spend some time with other people. As for the style and the language, we can say that the poem is written in rhyming couplets, AABB, and that Chaucer used a literary language based partially on French and Latin models, but that also included elements of the old popular tradition and the actual language that was spoken by people at that time. As for the characters, the characterization, it is particularly realistic. Chaucer wanted to give a portrait of true English, of the real English society. He introduced, as I have told you first, the characters in the general prologue that, as I have told you, is a sort of frame of the work. He did not follow the social hierarchy, that is, he mixes characters, that is, female and male, because women were acquiring a good position in social life of the time, and also he mixes members from the clergy with other pilgrims, so he doesn't respect the traditional hierarchy according to which the clergy should come first in the description, should be more important. In the description of the characters, what is important is the description of clothes, of tools, degli arnesi, attrezzi da lavoro, the personal qualities, and also the personality. So, physical features, but also the personality, the skills, the personal qualities, the clothes, all that were typical of the social classes that they represented. And for this reason, the names were given to the pilgrims referring to their profession, because their profession reflected their view, their moral view, their uses, their customs, and their personality. The two themes, the themes are the journey and the pilgrimage. The pilgrimage is set in spring as a time considered as time of rebirth, and it is a spiritual journey that metaphorically represents human life. Okay, that's all for the lesson of today. Goodbye.